Okay, so I have my pan heating up here, right? I'm just doing an onion piqué. I'm making a small portion. So this small piece of onion that I have here is perfect. I have my bay leaf here, and I'm just going to stab the bay leaf to the onion using 2 cloves. You're gonna push it in and push that in. All right, just like that. So it's gonna stay whole. I won't have to go and dig for those cloves later on. It's gonna stay nice and together, all right? Just make sure you have that root end intact there, all right? So I have my pan heating up here. I am just going to, I have it on a low heat for right now. I'm going to add in some butter. All right, I'm just gonna add in some butter. Just let that melt down. Don't brown your butter. All right, if you accidentally burn your butter, just start again. All right, we just want to melt it. And we're using whole butter here. But when you're making a roux, you can use any fat you would like. So if you want to use lard, you can. If you would like to use margarine, you can. Butter, of course, produces the best flavor. All right. Now that my butter is melted, I'm going to add in some flour to create my roux. All right, I'm going to turn my heat back on to a low. Okay, I'm going to add in some flour. And I'm going to combine that butter and flour together. And this is what is going to create our roux. This roux here is what is going to thicken our sauce. All right, so stir it until it's combined. You shouldn't see any chunks of flour. I'm going to add just a touch more flour into mine. You want equal parts of butter to flour. So if you do 1 ounce of butter, do 1 ounce of flour. All right, now I have it nice and combined. I have no chunks whatsoever. If you cook your roux a little bit longer, you're going to produce a nuttier flavor. And it just really depends on what type of mother sauce that you're making. So we're doing a bechamel here, so we want to leave our roux as white as possible. I'm just going to add in a splash of our liquid here, and for the bechamel, it's going to be milk. And stir it till combined. So we're going to add a little bit at a time. And the reason why we are doing this is to prevent any lumps from forming. And you can see as soon as I add that milk in there, that roux just soaks it up. All right, so we're going to keep adding in our liquid until we reach our desired consistency. All right, keep stirring. So if we were making an Espagnole sauce, we are going to brown our roux a little bit longer. All right, you should see it become about a golden brown color. All right. And the key is just to keep adding that liquid in. All right, if we were to stop adding in at this stage, we're just gonna have a thick paste. And because this is a sauce and we would like to be able to utilize it somehow, we're gonna keep adding in that liquid. So you can see it's still a thick paste. This is in case it's too thick for our sauce. We need to keep adding in our liquid. Like I said, the procedures are the same depending on what mother sauce you're making. The only difference is the liquid is changing out. So if you're making that velouté sauce, you're going to be using chicken stock. If you're making a tomato sauce, you're just going to be using tomato sauce or tomato juice. And you can see it's still pretty thick, but it is getting thinner. And it's really important that you just continue to add that liquid slowly. If you add too much at a time, your roux is just going to clump together, and it's really hard to break up that roux once there's too much liquid in there. So it's important that you just continue to add it slowly, a little bit at a time, stir it in, making sure there's no clumps forming. So my roux is still nice and smooth. You see it's getting a little bit thinner. I'm gonna add it more. So this bechamel sauce is really good to use in a variety of ways. You more commonly see it served with pasta. So if you're making like a homemade mac and cheese, you're going to start with this bechamel sauce as your base, and then you're just going to add cheddar cheese to it, and there you go. You have your sauce for a mac and cheese. Of course, you can get creative and add a variety of different cheeses to it, but that's your basic one. You could see how smooth that is. You still need to add a little bit more milk to it. And that's exactly what you want, though. You don't want to see any lumps. It should look nice and smooth. The other important thing to note about these sauces as well is because we are working with flour, we need to allow the time for that flour taste to cook out of our sauces. So if we were to taste this right now, we're just going to taste that flour. It needs about at least 20 minutes minimum to cook out. But the longer you let it cook, the more flavor will develop. And the longer it cooks as well, that flour is just going to continue to thicken. All right, so you may get it to a good consistency and then may come back to it and it's going to be thickened up again. So if that happens, which it will, just continue to add more liquid to it as needed. All right, so right now I have a good consistency. It's nice and thin. So I'm going to drop in that onion piqué that we did earlier. I'm going to drop it in like this. I don't have a super deep pan here. I'm not making a lot. So I do want that flavor of the bay leaf and cloves to cook in there. So I'm going to leave it just like this and let that cook. One thing to note, because we are working with milk here, we don't want it to scorch. So do continue to come back and give it a stir every now and then. And we're just going to let it sit on a nice low heat here. All right, we'll come back to it. Can even continue to give it a stir just to make sure nothing's sticking on the bottom. And we're going to be checking that consistency as well. So if it starts to thicken up, then we'll thin it out with some more milk here. Okay. All right, so while that bechamel is still cooking, I'm going to start the hollandaise. So we have our clarified butter here ready. We're going to start by separating our eggs. So we want just the yolks. So just separating those eggs. All right, my 2 yolks. All right, I have my pot here of water. It's barely on a simmer. All right, we don't want it to boil. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to be working on and off the heat while incorporating our clarified butter into our yolks here. All right, so I'm just going to start by whisking my yolks. All right, we just want to whisk them up. Right, I'm going to add it on top of my pot of water. Make sure you're working with a stainless steel bowl. Don't use a plastic bowl, right? You'll just melt your bowl, all right? Or you can use a glass bowl, it'll be just fine. So what I did is I added just a droplet of that clarified butter, letting it whisk up just for a minute. I'm gonna take it off of the heat, continue to whisk in that air, all right? If I were to just leave it on that pot the entire time, I'm going to more likely end up scrambling my eggs. So I want to be working on and off that heat. So I add in some butter, spend a couple seconds whisking it on top of that heat, and then I'm going to pull it off. Add in a little bit more of the clarified butter. And then we're going to put it back on our heat. Okay. Make sure that you continue to whisk the entire time. If you stop, you get distracted, you could end up scrambling your eggs, or if it gets too cold, it'll just solidify and become butter. All right, so hollandaise sauce is most used on an Eggs Benedict. All right, so it has to maintain a good consistency, a good temperature as well. So if it gets too hot, it'll scramble. If it gets too cold, it just becomes butter. This is why we work on and off the heat. And so we can tell it's done by if we lift up our whisk and it leaves a ribbon pattern. Right now, it just sinks right back into it. All right, we still have a ways to go. To get the consistency that we want, you have to be doing 2 things. You have to continue to incorporate that clarified butter, and you have to continue to whisk. Right, when you're whisking, make sure you're whisking around the bowl and in that center. All right, don't just spend all your time in that center, because what will end up happening is you'll have scrambled eggs around that outside. And when you're done, it should be a nice rich sauce. It shouldn't taste eggy, all right? So if it tastes eggy, it's probably because you scrambled it. So you could start to see it's starting to set up on top just a little bit. We want it to stand up just a little bit more so you can see that ribbon that's starting to form. So we need a little bit more clarified butter. And I had clarified about ½ a pound of butter here, which is plenty. So if you do end up scrambling, you still have plenty of clarified butter, just start again. When you're whisking, if you start to get too tired, it's because you're moving your entire arm, okay? Use just your wrist. I like to keep my elbow glued to my side and to practice working just that whisk. Just that wrist, I should say, using the whisk, okay? So I think if I add just a little bit more of our clarified butter here, It's just about there, I would say. You can feel too if your bowl starts to get a little bit hot, which mine is, I'm gonna leave it off of the heat because it's plenty warm. All right, so if I lift it up here, and can you guys see how it stands up? You can see it will eventually sink back in there, but it stands up for a couple seconds. You see that before it melts back in there? That's our hollandaise. That's it done. If we continue to add in our clarified butter, it'll just continue to get thicker. And because this is a sauce, and let's say we are putting it on top of an eggs Benedict, we want it to just melt all over that poached egg. All right, so if we had it too thick, it would just gloop on there, and that's not what we want. So we want that nice runny sauce. You see how it stands before it sinks in there? All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to season it with salt, a little bit of lemon juice, and a little pinch of cayenne pepper. Okay. If it starts to get a little bit cold, put it back on your heat. All right, I'm gonna go grab a tasting spoon. Like I said, it should not taste eggy. You should taste that richness of the clarified butter. It should taste a little bit salty. Oh, that's good. Just a pinch more of salt here, and a little squeeze of some more lemon juice. Make sure that's well incorporated. If you're working with kosher salt, it does need a second to dissolve, whereas table salt is a lot finer, so it will dissolve a lot quicker, whereas kosher salt's on the flakier side, so it does take a second to break down. Oh, that's delicious. That's it. There's our hollandaise. So you should taste, it should taste a little bit spark of salt, a little bit of that lemon. That cayenne is just a pinch, just to give it a little depth in there. There isn't too much of that cayenne, so you shouldn't see a lot of specks of red. All right, if you add too much in there, it'll turn your product orange, okay? It should stay that nice bright yellow. Okay. All right, so coming back to our bechamel here, which has been slowly cooking away. I can smell that fragrance from our onion piqué in there. You could smell a little bit of that onion, that clove, that bay leaf. It gives it such depth of flavor. So now what we're going to do, because we're going to turn this into a Mornay sauce, I'm going to turn my heat down very, very low. When you're adding cheese into a sauce, if your heat is too high, it'll break the sauce. The cheese will separate and you'll have very stringy cheese and then half sauce. So you really want to be careful when you're adding cheese into anything. So if your sauce itself is a little on the hot side, you can even turn off your heat or you can leave it on a low heat, but never ever on a high. Okay. So to finish it now, we're going to add some salt. And I have some Parmesan here. and some Gruyere. Right, and we're just going to stir those in. For a white sauce like this, I will never or almost never add any black pepper to it. The black pepper will stand out a lot, and I don't want to see those flecks of the black. So if you do have white pepper on hand, white pepper is preferable if you absolutely have to have pepper. But just note that for white pepper, a little bit goes a very long way. You do not need as much as you would for black pepper. Okay, but for this one, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily need it. So you should still see a nice smooth sauce. I'm just stirring it, making sure that cheese gets melted in. You can see I have it on a very low heat. You really don't want to go any higher than that. And give it a taste. Okay. So I get a lot of that cheese flavor, but to really bring it out, I always say to know your salt level, your food should make you want to dance. So if you taste it and you're like, okay, that's good. But if you taste it and that makes you want to go, oh, and dance, that's how you know it's good. That's how you know it's salted well. That salt is going to bring out the rest of those flavors. So don't be afraid of salt. Salt does not always mean salty. Okay. So cheese does have salt in it as well. So do be mindful of that when you are salting. We're gonna give it another taste. Just about there. The pinch more of salt here. Now we're going to stir that in. Remember, we're using kosher salt here, so we're going to give it a couple seconds to dissolve in our product. And again, if you taste it and it does taste like flour, just let it continue to cook on that heat, all right? Just keeping a watchful eye on it so it doesn't scorch. But while it was simmering away on the heat, I just had it on a very low heat. All right, don't leave it on a medium or even a high. Put it on a low, keep an eye on it, give it a stir. Remember to adjust that liquid if needed. All right, I'm gonna give it another taste. Well, you see that good consistency, that's what we're looking for. Nice, smooth run off there. If you pick it up and it just plops down, it's a little thick. All right, we just want that nice run there. Oh, that's good. Yeah, it's perfect. Really, that salt, although it did taste good that first time I tasted it, it didn't taste as good as it could have, right? And it's just adjusting that salt. The salt really does, it brings out the flavor of the cheeses, it brings out the flavor of the onions, of those cloves, and it just brings it all together. All right, that's it. My bechamel is done here. Now it's ready. We can use it for pasta, serve it with anything that we'd like.